Hello everybody and welcome to the subpart 5.1 of the BMS Modding tutorial series. In the preceding part 5.0 I explained how weapons are implemented in Falcon BMS in general, what files are required, or impacted, where they are located, what their content and purpose is and how they are linked together. So let's put this into practice and resume work on EF2000 DELTA. In this video you'll learn how to add a new weapon to the database. I will add the GBU-48 Enhanced Paveway 2 bomb to the database, as it is an important weapon for the EF2000 aircraft. As a brief recap, we will need a custom model and textures, 3 database record entries in the class table, weapon control data and sim weapons data. A weapon data file is in this case not required, as guided bombs of this kind are not using dedicated data files in BMS at this point. This specific subject matter will therefore be covered in the next video. So let's get started.
Okay, so the first thing that I do, it's not a necessary step, but I perform it for my CADAs since EF2000 BTO. I open the database files directly, so not with the editor, and I'm creating several dummy entries past the last record entry in that file. So the last record entry in that file is the number 5260. I typically note this down, already have done this. And then you simply can enter a higher number here. In this case, I select the 6010 as in my configuration that I have already defined. The GBU-48 gets the CT record number 6011. So I save this file and I do the same thing now. And I do the same things now with the other weapon related files, so the sim weapon data. In this case, at the bottom, the last one is a 395. So to get some distance, I select the 450, save this one, and go on with the weapon control data. In this case, we have the 864 as the highest record entry. The error implies we are missing that one. And then we start with number 900. So there's room in between for additional entries. So in case the BMS team updates the database in the future, and that will definitely happen, I can easily import directly in the XML file new entries beyond the last run, 864 in the first one that I base my work on, so I don't need to rework that soon. That's the only reason why I pursue that strategy. So if we now start the editor, there should be a larger number of dummy record entries in these 3 subfiles of the database. It's by default sorted by index number, so if we now go down to the end, 6010 is the last one, and you see a lot of empty dummy entries, so a lot of spare capacity for growth in the future. And here we see 5260 was the last one used, and the same is true for the other two files, so weapons for weapons control data and weapons data respectively. Okay, so the GBU48 is essentially a modified version of the GBU16. We have the GBU16 in the database, so I will simply create the GBU48 as a renamed modified copy of the GBU16. Generally, it's recommendable that if you create a new weapon, select a similar weapon, ideally with the same guidance, for example, and then create a copy of it. It's very easy. So we take, in this case, the GBU16, make a right click and select Add Weapon Copy. So duplicate associated city also. You can accept this or not. I do. So we have also the corresponding class table record automatically displayed. We can now rename this weapon copy. It has an hashtag in front of it, so we call it simply GBU48. So for the time being, that should be enough. Let's briefly open the CT record, and it is still pointing at the ZIM weapons data from the GBU16. It's 109. So what we do in this case, after saving the change here, is that we now search the record entry 109 for the GBU16. That's that one, and we create a copy of it as well. So let's sort it by index number again. It's located at the top. And we now simply rename it to GBU48. Then we go back either to class table, where we open it. Has not updated its name here in yet, but it will. And now we should be able to select the GBU48 here. So we have already updated the pointers. What's left to do in this case, we move the model and texture that I have prepared. And we can then directly update the CT record. And the model, let's start with the texture. It's 11,080 DDS, so same logic applies here. I use high numbers so that there's no interference. If I would like to use that stuff in an existing theater, I typically don't. But for EF2000 BTO, for example, I've been using the stock Balkan theater models and textures folder for the simple reason that the Balkan theater features a number of custom models and I didn't want to replicate them in my own theater, so I have decided to place the few models that I use in the stock Balkans theater, but used high enough numbers so that there should be ideally no interference within the foreseeable future. So okay, so I simply first create this model folder. I've defined the number 11,041 for this one. You can use any number you want as long as such a number folder does not exist already. Then you simply copy paste over here. The texture is actually defined within the model itself. So in this case, if you just want to transfer something, unless you have access to the source model, or as in this case, for example, the old lot model version, you will not be able to change the texture number right now and can only hope that it's not used by another asset, because that would be problematic. So we have now moved both model and texture in there, so we can update the normal, that's the model number. So it has now updated its name as well. So everything is in. And when we now view the 3D model, it doesn't like it, so we try again. Sometimes if you move new stuff in there and it's not loaded by the database, it may crash. So now it works. We have a slightly modified texture compared to the stock GBU 16, but nothing dramatic for the time being. So, and now as the GBU 48 is a dual mode bomb instead of a laser guided only bomb like the GBU 16, we will change the guidance for this bomb accordingly, and the easiest way to do this is to select a weapon as a reference that provides exactly the capability we want. We take the GBU 49, which is the 500-pound version of the enhanced PFA 2, and we can now cross compare these entries if you don't know them out of your head. This is for illustrative purposes, but it's never bad to have a cross check. So important in this case are the experts subtype in specific. Of course, the type itself should match as well. In this case, we have the difference between the subtype, which defines the guidance. It's just part of the equation, but nevertheless. And also the specific number is different, so we select the same specific number in this case to get the correct guidance. Okay, next part is to compare the appropriate weapon control data. So as you can see, there are differences. We adopt the bomb drop sound because it's a bomb. Bomb GPS, search and LGB, that is important. This entry has been missing for the GBU 49 until update 1, and therefore the laser mode did not work with that weapon. The next thing you have to take a look at is the guidance. It's visual in this case. For laser guided bombs it's laser, so we take visual. And in the next step we also check out the data here, and as you can see it's dump it bombs instead of GBU, and it's LJDAM type, and this has not been adopted. Okay, and that's basically everything. Now we should have exactly the same guidance. It's important that for some weapons you also need to check the has display function. This is not the case here, but just to make you aware of this. Yes, and that's basically everything. So we now have the GBU 48 integrated. What you need to take into account is that you of course need to add this weapon to the loadouts of other aircraft now, and that you add an appropriate quantity for this weapon in the squadron stores. I won't do this. Well, I can do this just for illustrative purposes. For the Typhoon squadron stores index is the number 23. Otherwise, you can also search by name. So by default, you only should get weapons displayed that have a quantity or that are included in the weapon loadouts. So if you want additional weapons, then you simply click here, show weapons not carried by this aircraft. So at the moment the GBU 48 is not available. So what we are doing is Sort by name, we see here the GBU48. Let's now increase, let's say, to 80. You can also directly enter the 80 here, or increment, decrement by 10 or 1, or set to 0. Also specify the service time, and then press save. And now this weapon is included in the squadron stores for those aircraft using the squadron store entry. In this case, it's the Eurofighter, the German variant, and the Typhoon FGR4, the British variant. Yes, and that's it. The integration of weapons, or better said, weapon loadouts. Yes, and that's it, with exception of adding the weapon to the aircraft. So we can briefly illustrate this. This data will be overwritten at a later stage. So let's take the Eurofighter, because the Eurofighter is the aircraft that carries the GBU48. The Typhoon FGR4 is not. And we simply go to weapons here. Let's increase the size of this window. And now you essentially simply create the slot where you want to add the weapons. Slot 2, it's stations 2 and 12. You click on view. You currently see what weapons are available here. GBU49 is actually not carried by the German aircraft, so what we are doing at this point is replace the GBU49 with the GBU48. You can here also change the number of weapons that can be carried on this particular station. And as the station is used by slots 2 and 12, the one is automatically updated here as well, because we have just changed the record, the sim weapons data, weapon load data record called EFGE to 12. Okay. If you press save, then the weapon loadout should be saved, and if we launch the game, then we should find this new weapon in the loadouts of the German variant on the outboard wing pylons at the moment. Okay. Just a quick one at a flight. Taking the Eurofighter. Doesn't matter what we want. Let's take a strike if it works. It does. Oh, long distance. And we now check out the weapon loadout. Air to ground, and here we have the GBU48 on the outbound pylons. That the weapon is now directly attached to the aircraft, and not to the rack, is owed to the fact that the rack data are not properly prepared. But that's something that can be fixed later on. It's just for illustrative purposes. So you have added the weapon, and if you would check out in a campaign, you would also see that it has a quantity. But at the moment I don't know whether there's any campaign containing a Eurofighter in Korea, so I won't look for one at this point in time. And so you have added in a weapon, created a new weapon in the database, added it in the loadouts, defined the quantity, and the only thing that in this case doesn't work is that the pylon shows up, but that's a subject for another video in the future. In the next video we will also cover the weapon data file that's currently missing, because the GBU48 needs none, so stay tuned for the next video where I will transfer the Brimstone 2 missile from a previous version of Falcon BMS and integrate this with EF2000 DELTA. So see you soon. Bye.